Vive la Resistance! Hello, this is Sound and Fury Book Reviews, Proust Reflections. As usual, I'm Tina, and this video today is focusing on Book 3, The Guermantes Way, Part 8 for me, which is page 721 to 620 in my version. I'm done. I have finished The Guermantes Way. This is great. I am halfway done in search of lost time, so that's kind of exciting. Some housekeeping notes before I do my little review thingy. No one really watches these, which is fine. I've come to accept that, but whatever. I'm going to be doing bi-weekly reviews and recaps instead of weekly reviews because it doesn't take me like 1,000 years to do these videos. Sometimes I am like rushing to get them done. So I figured if I do it every other week, that leaves me more time to do other videos on my channel, like my favorite classic sci-fis and stuff that will get a bit more interest. I mean, who isn't, interested in Proust? Anyway. So, the endless party has finally come to a close. Marcel's ready to go home. Well, not go home. He's ready to go see the Baron de Charlus. But of course, he has to wait for the Princess de Parme to leave, because one does not leave before royalty. Pfft, screw that. I leave when I leave. Anyway, the princess's ladies in waiting, they see Marcel leaving, and they like his rain boots, despite them being a rather, lower class attire. There was a whole thing about his rain boots, and I'm just like, geez, Marcel, setting some trends. Marcel then goes to see Charlus, who loses on him for unknown reasons, and then berates him and goes off on him. Proust doesn't often include, the narrator, Marcel's responses as dialogue in these novels. He often just describes how he felt or how he responded kind of in passing. In this case, his verbal replies to Charlus are unknown, but he does end up destroying the man's hat, which was amazing. That completely surprised me. Charlus then calls him back in the room and gives him a ride home in his carriage. Maybe he was impressed with Marcel's reaction. I don't know. Marcel receives an invitation to the Princess of Guermantes' party, and then he goes to ask the Duke and the Duchess whether it was a mistake that he was invited, I guess. And then while he's there, Swann arrives as well, and we find out that Swann has 3 months to live, which is quite sad. So that's an interesting cyclical ending, because the book started kind of with Grandma's death, and now it's ending with presumably Swann's at some point. So that was kind of an interesting way to do it, to wrap up the themes. So that's kind of what happened in this last section. There's some cool moments that I liked. So there's a reference to Villa wanting to bone Mr. Norpois, and all I can say is, called it. I totally saw that coming. There's an interesting passage I will read here. For all these reasons, conversations with the Duchess resembled the discoveries that we make in the library of a country house. Out of date, incomplete, incapable of forming a mind, lacking in almost everything that we value, but offering us now and then some curious scrap of information, or even a quotation from a fine passage which we did not know, and as to which we are glad to remember in after years that we owe our knowledge of it to a stately baronial mansion. I thought that was kind of an interesting way of kind of saying that the Duchess doesn't say a lot, but she memorizes a lot of stuff. Okay, so I have to read to you the part where Marcel destroys the Baron de Charlus' hat, because it's so funny. I seized the Baron's new silk hat, flung it to the ground, trampled it, picked it up again, began blindly pulling it to pieces, wrenched off the brim, tore the crown in two, heedless of the continuing vociferations of Mr. Charlus, and crossing the room in order to leave, opened the door. That was amazing. Ripped the hat in half. There's another interesting part. These are long passages, so that's why I'm reading them out to you instead of just kind of talking about them. Swann's illness was the same that had killed his mother, who had been struck down by it at precisely the age which he had now reached. Our lives are, in truth, owing to heredity, as full of cabalistic ciphers, of horoscopic castings, as if sorcerers really existed. And just as there is a certain duration of life for humanity in general, so there is one for families in particular, that is to say, in any one family, for the members of it who resemble one another. So this argument doesn't really make that much sense, because relatives that look alike are not going to die the same way of the same illnesses. But I don't think that's what he's trying to say, even though it's kind of what it says on the surface. I think he's actually talking about DNA and genetic mutations. So Kabbalistic ciphers for him could be genes. because scientists didn't really know about DNA and chromosomes and genetic functions like in relation to hereditary diseases or traits until the late 1920s. So it's possible Marcel was referencing this new science in this passage, and I think that's actually quite interesting because for us, right, like we're taught about this kind of stuff in school, like this is kind of the basics of science in science classes about DNA and heredity, and we all understand how, things are genetic, but back then, only 100 years ago, people did not have that as common knowledge. And I really find that interesting when these kind of things come up in these kind of stories. And that's kind of why I like reading texts from this time period, because they were on the cusp of knowing what we know. So I don't know, I just find it very fascinating. And then one more thing. But after all, young or old, men or women, when all's said and done, these people belong to a different race. One can't have 1,000 years of feudalism in one's blood with impunity. Naturally, they imagine that it counts for nothing in their opinions. I just think that's a really funny comment on the aristocracy, on how they seem to think that they don't care about their heredity and bloodlines, but it's been so embroiled in them and it's such a big part of their self-identity that they can't possibly, like, even if they were to try to disregard the fact that they were part of a rich family, there's no way that they actually can. And I think that's kind of interesting from him coming as an outsider, but also himself, right? Like he's very proud of the fact that his family can like hang out with the Guermantes and things like that. So I think he's also kind of being a bit self-reflective as well. He doesn't give anyone that's lower than the upper middle class any time in this book. I mean, there's a little bit about Rachel, but she's vilified. And she's made out to be a kind of a parasitic person. So I think it's interesting that he is pointing out these things. I don't think he is unaware of the plight of the common person, but I don't think it's necessarily something that he worries too much about. Okay, there weren't any real quotes from this section other than the ones that I read to you. So I'm going to do a bit of an overview of the volume as a whole, just a bit of a review. I mean, I'm going to post this kind of similar thing on Goodreads, so you can go read it there if you really want to. I can't give this one 5 stars because while I still think Proust is rather a genius of the written word, this novel was quite tedious at times. I mean, it never like struggled to get through it, but there was something kind of drawing me to keep reading to it other than like these goals of making these videos every week. There weren't nearly as many beautiful passages in this one as the previous 2 volumes, and there weren't a lot of the kind of universal moments. The other 2 volumes dealt with growing up or childhood concerns and nostalgia, which are relatable subjects, as well as some other minor subjects. But there was really only one universal theme in this novel, and that was illness and dying. Fun. The other themes of the novel weren't really of interest to me. They focused on things like rich people, social climbing, and royalty. He was providing a critique as well. Kind of. Everything to do with St. Loup, the horse wrangling, the wire jumping was always interesting. I would like more of St. Loup. I wish this book just followed St. Loup around, to be completely honest. The Albertine afternoon delight was a fun moment as well. And I really enjoyed the criticism and discussion of the Dreyfus case and other topical issues. Those were really interesting from a new historicist perspective, which is really like how I like to read novels. I love the little bits dealing with kind of growing tensions leading to World War I. As you know, I'm a World War I junkie. The volume focuses a lot on the Duchess of Guermantes, Oriane. Oriane is an interesting character. To me, she read as someone who is too intelligent for what life in her class and gender allowed her to be. And so she takes out this frustration and lack of stimulation out on other people by, crafting these clever jibes and jokes at their expense and telling the same stories, that make people laugh. I think she's just very lonely and pretends to accept her husband's cheating as something that she doesn't care about, when really it must hurt. And she must feel like a piece of crap that he's doing that to her, but she can't do anything about it either way. And I think that's kind of the real kind of sad part about Oriane. And what makes Oriane an interesting character is that you can tell that a lot of the stuff that she's doing is to mask her own self-worth issues. So the thing is, though, Proust doesn't tell us this. This is just my perception of Oriane. And that's what I really think where Proust excels, is that he gives us these kind of overviews of the characters. He doesn't put us in their heads. And so that makes us form our own perceptions of them. Kind of like how we form our perceptions of people in real life. We listen to them talk, we see them move, we see them act, but we don't get to see inside their heads. So I think that's kind of why he is such a great writer. Overall, I enjoyed the Guermantes Way, but too much rich people, I'm definitely more of, an eat the rich kind of person. I went to the Palace of Versailles, like 8 years ago or something with my husband, and it made me really annoyed. I mean, I couldn't even call the palace beautiful because all I could think about when I was walking through it was the fact that it was built on blood money, basically. All these people suffering and, children unable to eat, people dying in the streets from lack of food. And then you have these rich people building this room full of mirrors and gold inlaid furniture. And I'm just like, it's disgusting. Like, it's disgusting. I'll never go back to the Palace of Versailles. And yeah, we actually instead of touring, because we did the tour, and then they were like, oh, you can tour the grounds until the bus comes back. And we're like, I don't really want to. So we went and found this awesome pub and we had lunch. It was great. Anyway, I think the French Revolution was a necessary point of history. And that's where I'm going to end. Vive la Resistance.